백훈종의 전지적 비트코인 시점. Bitcoin ETFs are not in Korea yet, but everybody is waiting for it to happen. But some people worry about Bitcoin ETFs expanding to these many major countries. Do you think Bitcoin ETFs, spot ETFs, will eventually manipulate the Bitcoin price?
I mean, any buy or sell manipulates price almost by definition, right? Like, so anytime anyone buys it, that means there's a little bit more demand. Anytime someone sells it, then there's a little bit more supply and so on. So by definition, yeah, it manipulates the price. Now, is it going to be done at the level that like the Federal Reserve does with the stock market or Treasury interest rates or something like that? I mean, there are arguments to be made on both sides, but I suspect not really, because these are. I mean, it's possible that they start rehypothecating the Bitcoin and selling Bitcoin that doesn't exist and stuff. But if you get and they're talking about this right now, those are cash redemption ETFs only. So if you want to take out 100 Bitcoin, I think that's the tranche or whatever that you have to get to be able to withdraw from the ETF. You get cash instead of Bitcoin. But they're talking about actual Bitcoin settlement. And if that rule goes into effect, then all of that will be very obvious, if they're trying to sell Bitcoin that doesn't exist or sort of do the fractional reserve stuff that got banks in trouble years ago. What a lot of people suspect is going on with like the gold ETF and so on. So there's a bit of that. It's hard to tell, and we don't really know. But the volumes on these ETFs are absolutely huge, and for a good reason, right? Like prices going up. I think it's one of the best performing assets in the past year. It doubled last year. It doubled this year. It's looking pretty good for most people that have been in it, and people are coming around to it. So obviously, there's a lot of interest institutionally, a lot of pension funds and so on that have significant gaps. They're underfunded and they're assuming sort of like 9% annual return for like the next 20 years, and they need riskier assets, except they're not allowed to invest in them. So having a Bitcoin ETF can certainly help with that. Now, I'm like, how that affects Korea or other countries when they have it, I don't know. It probably depends on sort of like the public union infrastructure and any sort of like pension plan that your country has. And I'm not familiar with that at all about Korea. But if any of those are underfunded, then I suspect that this sort of thing would become a little more popular, because at a certain point, you're going to have to start taking risk, right? Like if you're an underfunded pension and you're assuming 9% returns and you've been getting 6 or 7, you're going to have to do something different. And this is like the one hope for them. And we'll see. But that's sort of the role it has in the market. I don't know if it's going to be manipulating Bitcoin price as much as just adding demand. And we know Bitcoin has a fixed supply, and the more demand there is, the higher the price goes.
Right. Absolutely. I think it's Hester Pierce, the SEC congresswoman. She's the one who's advocating for this Bitcoin redemption, right? In-kind redemption. So everyone who purchases Bitcoin ETF, when they sell the ETF and they can get actual Bitcoin out of it?
No. The way ETFs work is that they're tied to a commodity, right? So a gold ETF is supposed to track gold. Then the way they make that track exactly is the ETF has a certain amount of gold that it possesses. But if you have enough of the ETF shares, and it's usually a large tranche, so I don't know the exact number, but 1,000 ounces of gold worth of the ETF, you can redeem only in 1,000-ounce increments. But that gives it enough of an arbitrage opportunity to a big player, so that if the price goes out of whack, then they'll either put in more gold into the ETF or they'll withdraw the gold from the ETF. So that's the idea, is that there would be market makers that sort of create that strong link between the two, because if they're able to withdraw Bitcoin, not at like the 0.001 Bitcoin level, but probably in tranches of like 10 Bitcoin or something like that, $1 million worth of Bitcoin. Like
Right.
you have to have $1 million worth of the ETF to be able to withdraw 10 Bitcoin, something like that. And it's only in multiples of 10. Then that would give enough of an escape hatch that it would be very strongly linked and almost guarantee that it's not fractionally reserved.
Yeah, I think it's almost similar strategy with the Japanese yen carry trade, right? These Japanese rich people in Japan called Mrs. Watanabe, they throughout the period when their economy like was so down for almost 30 years, they have to invest in something stronger than yen. So they just use the dynamics, right? They borrowed with a cheap interest rate in Japan, and then they invest into something much stronger. And I think the most of the money came into the US, the stock market. I think nobody can deny that the reason why NASDAQ or S&P 500 has gone up so dramatically for the last 20 or 30 years was because the money from Japan, this Mrs. Watanabe, that had to invest in something stronger than Japanese yen. So that's one of the reasons that why the U.S. stock market was so good. And I think the U.S. corporations are doing the exact same thing with the dollar and Bitcoin. That's how I compare these two strategies.
Yeah, I'd say that's pretty accurate. The yen carry trade wasn't nearly as profitable as the Bitcoin trade, though, because the Bitcoin trade is just like he's just printing stocks and using that to collect money and buying Bitcoin. And because the multiple is higher than one, then he can it's kind of an infinite money glitch. And he's like buying like billions and billions every week. It's just absolutely insane. And he's not going to be the only one. There are other companies starting to do that, and at some point, like that ball gets rolling. It's okay. We have this much Bitcoin on our balance sheet too, but right now, MicroStrategy is king on this score. But I mean, there's going to be competition. There already is in some ways.
Hey, I think the world economy is in a really strange situation now, because US is decreasing the interest rate. At the same time, Japan is about to increase the interest rate, and China is devaluing their currency, and then they just rolled out this new huge plan for bail out their economy. So, and there's two wars going on in Middle East and Europe. So I don't know. The uncertainty is like even bigger than before. It's so big. So nobody can expect what to happen the next year or the after 2 years. But do you still think the global liquidity will increase eventually? Because the correlation between the two is so high, right? The Bitcoin and the global M2 supply increase. I think Bitcoin price is going to go up dramatically when the global M2 increases. Do you think even in Trump administration, the U.S. will still print money, issue the new bonds?
Yeah, I mean, I think they kind of have to. We'll see how much of a cut like Doge will do and so on. But the biggest liabilities on the U.S. budget are the biggest spending things are Medicare, Social Security, and defense. Like those are, I mean, there'll be some cuts administratively and so on, but like the unfunded liabilities on Social Security alone is like 300 trillion. I mean, and you can you're going to have to print, right? Because you're not going to collect enough in taxes to pay those out, especially as population decreases. So there's no slowing down that train unless you inflate your way out of it, which is typically what governments do when they have obligations that they can't meet. But look, what you were saying about like Japan is increasing the interest rate and the U.S. is lowering it somewhat. Well, that's taking away the yen carry trade, right? Like, and that was a big hole the last few years, and that was a big driver of the stock market increase in the U.S. Like you said, similar with China and so on. Like there's a lot of people there that wanted to park money in somewhere other than China, so they've been buying up real estate all over the world, like especially like places like Vancouver or Toronto,
Dubai.
or places like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just kind of crazy. But that's been happening as a part of sort of like almost like a de-risking of the putting all your eggs in like sort of China's basket or whatever. Because I think a lot of people are kind of nervous. Okay, what happens if something really goes down? How is everything going to work out? And people feel that the world the wars that are happening right now certainly don't help with that, and just the amount of sort of economic turmoil that this has caused, like the Ukraine war, for example, as Europe is just absolutely insane. Like Germany, like economic stagnation, like significant economic stagnation there. But even places like Canada, just bad management, right? Like
Yeah.
they had almost near parity with the U.S. in terms of salaries and so on, like 20 years ago, but it's like fallen behind by a significant amount since then. So you get a bigger brain drain and everything else. So yeah, there's a lot in the world that's kind of weird right now, and I think this is why a lot of people are turning to Bitcoin, because they like, at least the people that understand what it's about, at least the people in the meetups that I've met in a lot of these places. They get it. They're like, okay, yeah, this is like a pristine asset that is not controlled by a government. It's politically neutral, and it's it's not at the whim of some central banker somewhere. That becomes extremely attractive. I think it will continue to be so. As a lot of these fiat institutions sort of like are aging out, they're sort of collapsing in on themselves. The bureaucratic, like there's like a bureaucratic black hole of
Yeah.
money sucking. It's the event horizon is expanding, so it's getting worse and worse. So I suspect that that's going to be a big part of the next, however many years until we get on a Bitcoin standard.
Yeah, 100%. I agree with you, like 100%. And then I think more people escape to Bitcoin to prepare for this uncertainty. And on the other side, there's the government, right? The government wants to control people. They want to especially control the finance out of their people. Then their solution would be CBDCs, I think. I don't think US government is trying to issue CBDCs anymore because of Trump administration said they will ban CBDCs. But Korean government is still exploring into it, and China has already launched it, and then they're beta testing in different cities. Europe is exploring into CBDCs as well. Do you think CBDCs will be a threat to Bitcoin? Do you think it's going to come out and eventually the surveillance level from the government will be more harsh than before, and everybody will be suffer from the financial repression from the government because of the CBDCs?
I actually don't think CBDCs are that close, and the reason I say that is because I'm a programmer and I know how badly government does anything IT related. And like, if you think about how well a CBDC has to work, it has to be up 24/7. Can't ever have any downtime. And it has to work the first time. It has to be really convenient. Like everywhere that's tried a CBDC usually falls to technical problems, user interface problems, user experience problems, and so on. Like
Yeah.
Nigeria released one, like just nobody used it because it was like way too difficult to use. Like, and they're like, we're used to cash is easier. And I've seen this, like even in other industries, this tends to be the case where you try to digitize everything, like put everything online or whatever. It takes way longer than you think, right? And it's only with like many iterations and a lot of failures that you finally get to something even usable. Like I used to work in healthcare, for example, and big thing for a long time is electronic medical records instead of like paper or whatever. And you'd observe these doctors like use a piece of paper, and they can go through it in like 2 minutes and mark up everything that they need to. And then they go on to like a website that they're supposed to fill in all their information. It takes them 20 minutes. There's no way that they're going to go with something that takes 20 minutes versus 2. So their time's just too valuable.
Yeah.
I suspect that's what's going to happen with a lot of CBDCs is governments want it. Don't get me wrong, and I
Yeah.
think it's a central banker's wet dream, but they're not going to be able to do it because they're not that good at IT. I don't I like you could hire really good people, I guess, or whatever, but generally, the people that a government hires to do this sort of thing, they're not that good at it, right? Like they get it because of political favors or because they know the processes for government procurement and have the right connections to get that contract. They're not actually good at making software. So, I just don't think I know China's trying. I mean, they might be able to pull it off because they're very authoritarian. But, the US or whatever, if you saw what happened with healthcare.gov, like think of, the website went down like the first day and couldn't handle more than 50 users or whatever. Like that's the level of disaster I think we're looking at with any sort of CBDC rollout. It's not going to happen. It's way too politically risky. It's going to be way too costly. So for most of the people that are going to push for it, it's just going to be too big of an uphill battle to make happen.
What do you think of the stable coins then? Everybody wants to issue their own stable coins. Ripple just issued their own stable coins, and the reason why XRP price shot up recently was because of that issue, right? Authorized stable coins. PayPal issued their stable coins. Tether is so dominant. Everybody. So some of my subscribers asked me, do you prefer making this dollar checking account in the bank or purchasing Tether and store in the private wallet? Which one do you think is a better option? And I'm surprised that people ask these questions. Tether is, I still believe owning the actual dollar in a bank account is a safer option, of course. Tether is just issued by one company, right? But people just trust USDT as the super safe investment option these days. Do you have any opinion on Tether?
Yeah, I mean, I think I might disagree with you there because, in a sense, like if you hold dollars at your bank,
yeah,
they are fractional reserve banking, right? Like they lend out way more money than they have in reserve. The savings of everybody that hold money at the bank is like 10% of the loans that they give out, right? Like the reserve ratio in that case would be 10, where you have maybe like $1 million in deposits and you lend out 10 million, something like that. Like that would be a reserve ratio of 10. You look at the reserve ratio of Tether and the assets that they have, and it's like I think for every dollar they have like $1.10 in like reserve stuff. Like it's like overfilled. So in that sense, like for me, what the lesson of Tether is, that's what a bank should be, right? It's literally like just like they're performing all the functions of a bank. They have 50 employees. They have like $125 billion assets under management, and they're probably worth more than any US bank, right? Which like Chase Manhattan, I think alone employs like 200,000 people, right? Tether has 50. Like that tells you how inefficient the current banking system is, that they have to have all of that. But that's because they're a protected industry essentially by the government and so on. So I kind of like, to me, stable coins are just like wildcat banks or something like that, right? Like or less regulated banks of some kind, because they're doing the functions of a bank. People just want to save dollars, right, all over the world, right, whether you're in Nigeria or Japan or wherever, and that's all they want to do, and they just don't want it to be debased using their own crappy currency, which debases way faster. So just give us dollars, so we at least keep up better than our neighbor who keeps it in the local currency. That seems to be the main use case. Now, the bad part about Tether is that it's not that liquid, right? Like you have to convert it back to US dollars or whatever your local currency is, and there's sort of like friction around it. So if they could solve that problem, which again, that's sort of like the medium of exchange dilemma for almost everything, is getting a merchant to take it is actually quite difficult unless the merchant really wants that. So I mean that's what Tether is to me, and that's what like stable coins are, and this is why like a lot of other stable coins are trying to come onto the market, but I really don't think it's going to be easy to take that mantle away from Tether because there's a network effect, right? Like if one person is willing to take Tether, they're not suddenly going to say, well, all right, do you take Ripple dollars? No. Like,
No.
no, like, why would I like that? That's too much of a headache. Why would I do that? Also, how long has Ripple dollars have been around? Like a month, right? Like Tether's been
Yeah.
around for like 10 years now, right? Like it's a lot more of a brand name, and it's something that people trust because it's been there a long time, and that lead's only going to get bigger as they've lasted longer and longer. So yeah, I like all these other stable coins I have doubts about. Like there's some weird rumors going around USDC, for example. But like Tether seems to have won that stablecoin market, and I'm not sure there's really like demand for any other kind of stablecoin. They've tried launching like stable euro or stable yen or what. Like nobody wants any of that. It's they just want the dollars.
Right. Do you know there's a really big wholesale market, clothing wholesale market in Korea, in Dongdaemun? It's called 평화시장. It's a really famous wholesale market. So people, the merchants, come out and sell the fabrics or even garments like jeans and t-shirts and jackets and as well. So a lot of Chinese online shopping sellers come to Korea and purchase a lot of the fabrics there, and then they import it to Chinese mainland, and then they sell it to Chinese market. And from the early this year, I heard these merchants in the 평화시장, they accept USDT Tether.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, everybody, the Chinese sellers, Chinese buyers come to this market, and then they pay with the Tether. That's what I hear.
Yeah, I guess that would make sense because it's easier for them to interact with that rather than because if they were to try to pay in yuan, then they would have to convert it to dollars and then convert the dollars to won. That's like 2 round trips that they avoid just by using Tether. And if they get other, their suppliers pay them in Tether, then they can like actually go through. And I mean, that's kind of what international trade is mostly conducted in anyway, is the dollar. So if it's close enough to the dollar, I guess that would make sense.
Yeah, so I think this will be the last question. After the martial law taking place a few weeks ago, there are growing people who want to try self-custody for the first time. The majority of the crypto investors in Korea, they purchase Bitcoin and leave it in their crypto exchange account. But this demand for self-custody is just growing and growing. So I try to educate as easily as possible to these people, but it's still, difficult, very difficult, and people have a hard time understanding what these private wallets do and the private key do, what the public key is, etc. What do you think will be a game changer for the mass adoption of self-custody? What do you think will be necessary for people to learn the self-custody and actually exercise self-custody?
Yeah, I suspect a lot of those people are either non-technical or old or something like that. There's some barrier to that, right? And there's probably not that many resources on how to do self-custody and stuff. And my thesis has been for a while now that right now you have like sort of 2 extremes. You can leave your coins on an exchange, and that's sort of trusting the exchange, and then there's self-custody where you don't have to trust anybody. There's sort of nothing in between where you can trust somebody that or something like that. So I think we'll naturally go in that direction because I don't think everyone should self-custody. If you have a 10-year-old kid, probably shouldn't be self-custodying, right? I don't care like how careful they are. They're probably gonna like lose their seed phrase or whatever. Also similar with like 85-year-old grandpa, right? Like probably not like, starting to go senile or whatever. Probably not a great idea to have them self-custody either. And there's a lot of people that I think are just don't want to bother. So I think what's going to happen, or the way it's going to evolve, and like to some degree this already happens, is you're going to keep it with somebody that you trust that's sufficiently technical. So I know I am that for a lot of my relatives, right? Like my parents keep their Bitcoin with me, and like, I tell them, okay, you have this much, like, let me know whenever you need it or whatever. That I think is going to be the way that you're not going to get exactly self-custody, but at least off the exchanges, right? You don't have to have this central honeypot. Instead, it's sort of like smaller, like little federations or something. And who knows? Maybe that's like a good place for something like eCash, protocols of some kind, where you can trade those with privacy and so on. But that seems to be that I think will help at least have the coins not be on exchanges and be with somebody that you trust, right? And like for the truly paranoid, yeah, you can still go in self-custody, given you have sufficient technical aptitude and so on. But that's where I think, like especially in a place like Korea, where you have a very trust-based culture, right? Like you have close relatives, and like most families have like at least one guy that's like at least somewhat technical and can figure this stuff out. I suspect that that'll be something that that will become popular. I don't know, maybe there's a business in there for somebody.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I thought it would be really amazing to have some kind of a cold wallet that has a Neuralink feature. So it can be connected with my brain through the Neuralink, and then they can read the private key or seed phrase is imprinted in my brain, and then it's activated whenever I get close to the wallet, right? It would be awesome, right?
I like the way Neuralink works, from what I understand, is that you need to train it, right? Like,
Okay.
so then it sees the pattern many times, and then it understands, okay, this is what you want, or something like that. So you would have to train it somewhat in like recognizing what you want before it would do it. But I mean, like, just I'm very wary of like having any sort of like machine part in my brain that could get hacked in some way and like used against me. So I like, I get it for people that are paralyzed and don't have loss of certain functions, and it's their only way to interact with the world. But I don't know, voluntarily putting it in. I know how many security holes there are in software. It's just not a good idea. Take it from a programmer. Don't do it.
Right.